What's up, everybody? Welcome to Podcast Now. I'm Alex. In this video, I want to talk about EA. Now, this was a big day for them. It's a big day, I think, for all of us. What I wanted to do in this video, look, I think a lot of people are going to talk about the general news, and we'll do it, like, really quickly, but I want to really pivot it and talk about, okay, well, what could this mean for certain studios? Basically talking about some studios that I think maybe could be in trouble or just that I care about within EA, because I don't care about all of them, to be honest with you. Which ones, like, am I concerned about going forward? So obviously they were bought out, right? $55 billion, I believe. I think it was the highest buyout or the most money being spent, on one of these things that we've ever gotten entertainment wise. I mean, $55 billion. Also, just to throw out, like, remember when there was like all these companies were buying everybody, PlayStation, well, mainly Xbox. I mean, Microsoft was buying a lot. But remember, like, Xbox, PlayStation, Microsoft, Sony, and it's like, okay, which one will they buy next? I mean, I want to say just like a handful of years ago, like 3, 4, 5 years ago, some of these publishers were priced at like $20-30 billion. Remember when, like, obviously the Bungies and Activisions and all that stuff, and remember, like, when Take-Two is like worth $20-30 billion, like, it felt like they weren't really worth all that much. I mean, okay, 30 billion is quite a bit, but I want to say back in that war, literal war of these companies of like, okay, who do you buy next? Do you want to go out and buy Ubisoft? Do you want to buy, and when they were all being kind of evaluated and saying, okay, well, this company is worth this amount of money. I don't remember EA being worth 55 billion. No, to be honest, I don't check daily, so obviously I could be wrong there, but yeah, 55 billion, that's a lot of money. And what this really does, right? I mean, pro con, it kind of lets them be more free. I mean, they kind of have co-owners now. I think they have like 3 different groups, right? They kind of split the money. They're each doing like $13 to $20 billion each. So it's kind of like 3 different groups out there that have, allowed EA to do this, right? So in a way, it kind of gives EA freedom because they're not a publicly shared company anymore, right? So they can kind of do their own thing and they're owned. Now, the issue, or the con, is they're owned, so, I mean, the pro of being owned is you don't answer to, like, everybody or shareholders, which is a more broad group of people, right? But the issue is you are still owned, just like I guess you kind of were to begin with. Now you're owned by just a handful. Now you're owned by, and each of these companies, by the way, have a lot of power. When you're a shareholder, you hold 2%. You don't have as much power as if you are a co-owner, you own like 40% of EA. Now you got a lot of say. So that really, I think, is what scares a lot of people, right? And I mean, like, who's buying it as well, I think scares a lot of people as well. But I mean, that's the long and short, right? Like, they kind of have more freedom. They can kind of double down on like what they feel can make them successful. That's a pro. The con is the exact same thing I just said. They can double down on anything they feel is like a really good idea. And this time, I mean, like, public opinion and the shareholders' opinion, it doesn't matter anymore, right? I guess, look, at the end of the day, if games aren't going to get sold or, if they make big mistakes, they still answer to us, right? They still answer to the everyday person who buys the Madden games for 20 years straight. That's who they're enslaved to those people, I suppose. Really, I think it's the people that are enslaved to EA in that way, but that's really that. Okay, now in terms of what happens next, I looked at Jason Schreier. He talked about it a little bit. There's been a couple different articles written of whether it's like analysts kind of talking about what they feel could happen. Look, nobody knows for sure, like, what the next step is. Because some people are saying, okay, it's going to be mass layoffs. I think as part of this $55 billion, $20 billion was to offset debt or something. Look, I'm not a legal, analyst here, so I don't know all the lingo and stuff, but, there's a lot of kind of cleanup that EA has to do now versus like a day ago, let's say. And a lot of people are speculating, I guess by a lot of people, I mean, like, some analysts out there, right? Jason Schreier, I think, maybe being one among them, talking about, okay, well, there might have to be some trimming, and also, look, there's also history to look at. You look at when Microsoft, and really Microsoft is the big one to look at, when they buy stuff, when Embracer had bought stuff, in the past, what tends to happen after you spend like more than $2-3 billion? you normally have insane layoffs, like thousands of people, hundreds of people, I guess, if you're lucky, thousands of people if you're unlucky, or just the average, right? And you kind of trim the fat, to be honest with you. Like, we've seen it a little bit with Bungie, and then we've seen it much more with the Blizzards and Activisions and all that stuff. And Embracer obviously bought way too much, way too fast, and then had to shed dozens of studios, right? Laying off thousands and then closing studios as well. So I think that's what's scary to me and to analysts, but I'm also going to talk as myself now. What scares me going forward is that, to be honest, like, look, people I think will be pretty scared of like the investment firms and all that stuff that did this. Again, at the end of the day, EA is going to do, I think, very similar things that they've already done, and they answer, like I've already said, they answer to us. If we let them get away with Madden, we're still going to let them get away with Madden. To be honest with you, like, who owns them, I don't really think is going to change that. Ultimately, we need to be the ones to kind of put our foot down and say, all right, we're going to stop, selling 10 million copies of Madden. We're going to stop buying 10 million copies of Madden, and the Ultimate Team's giving them $1 billion every year. That's what's keeping them going. It kept them going with shareholders, and it kept them going to tell people that they're valued at $55 billion, right? So ultimately, it's still on us, and that's kind of where I stand on that end. Now, the things that are kind of like outside of our control, if they go and they destroy or shut down, let's just say that, they shut down BioWare, that is outside of our control. I guess technically what we have done to BioWare, like what they've given us and then how we've received it probably has influenced it. They are one that I'm worried about. When I think about a studio that they can really go in and say, okay, we need to trim fat, like we need to lay off people, maybe even shut studios down. Who can we go after? I think BioWare is probably team number one because they have an okay amount of people. They've had several failures in a row. They've had really no success stories at all in recent time. And by recent time, by the way, I mean 10 years now because Dragon Age Inquisition, I think, was 11 years now. And look, I mean, the Veilguard was the Veilguard. I wasn't a fan of it. I did reviews. I did all sorts of things for the Veilguard. I know people will have their opinions, and that's totally fine. But I also I don't like studios being shut down. I'll just say that, and maybe that's not, it shouldn't be all that hot of a take. I know that maybe a ton of talent that was there in the Mass Effect days and Dragon Age days are gone. I do get that, but I also I want to believe in the future. I also want to believe in Mass Effect. I don't have too much confidence in the Mass Effect game, but I want to believe in it. And I mean, at this point, like, this sale thing doesn't even happen officially, I think, until like March, April of next year. So I don't think they do anything right now. Maybe it would be like around this time next year, you'd start to see, okay, they're laying off 100 people here, they're laying off 100 people there. By then, okay, well, you're a year closer to Mass Effect. Basically, I just want them to try Mass Effect. Look, if Mass Effect fails, I think they're so screwed. And by screwed, I mean just shut down. That is screwed. But, that really, I think, is the punishment there. Like, it's Mass Effect, success or bust. And if you don't do it well, I think EA is coming for you and going to shut down BioWare. And I thought that a month ago, a year ago. I think that 5 times more now, because I think there's just going to be more pressure on them now. And that again goes to kind of the concern that I've seen of other people is, well, what if they double down on microtransactions? Okay, this Battlefield game being a friendly, I think the most fan-friendly game that we've gotten Battlefield-wise in a long time, and maybe one of the more friendly ones we've gotten, period. This could be the only one we get. That's kind of the fear, is like, okay, maybe after this game, they go back to just flooding them with microtransactions. Now, here's the thing, like microtransactions, right? But like FIFA and Madden and NHL and all, like, these have always been bad. These continue to get worse, to be honest with you. And so I don't really think they can get any, look, they do get worse, maybe even year over year, but there's only so much damage you can do to those, and people still, for whatever reason, buy them. So I guess, in that way, I don't care. To be honest with you, BioWare to me is a concern, right? Because it's like, okay, what do you do there? I do wonder about The Sims, because it's like, do you let that keep kind of like degrading, or do you try to do something new there. Like maybe there's pressure on them to like pushing them to do something there that wasn't, a day ago. I also then think to like the Iron Man game, so like Motive, I guess, and then like Respawn. So the thing that's interesting though is like we know that this is the last Jedi game, and while we do know that there's going to be more Marvel games, there is a cap to that. And then Star Wars, I feel like there's definitely a cap. Like after Star Wars, Jedi, whatever, that's it. And Respawn's so big, obviously, like Apex so big, but I wonder what happens to that team. Because that team, I think, should be allowed to do single-player game. They're so talented. They're unbelievably talented. And a Relic, really, look, there's studios like them, like outside of EA, but inside of EA, can you name me? Like Motive maybe is the only other one, right? And Motive really only recently got there. Because, they did Squadrons and all that stuff. Really, like Dead Space and then now Iron Man, I think they're establishing themselves as, hey, we can do these really big, single-player adventure games or whatever. But like, Respawn and BioWare even before that, like Respawn's one of none. There's no other ones they really besides them. So basically, really, it's just kind of those. Like, they have a really great partnership with Joseph Fares, right? Kind of the indies department of EA. There is, look, EA in a lot of ways has rebounded, because like Jedi wasn't even possible 10 years ago. Remember when Andrew Wilson talked about like, single player games are dead, nobody wants them? Like this is the guy, by the way, still running it. He's still gonna run it even after the sale. That's just great. But this is a publisher that's had so many problems and had, I would say, even more problems back in the day. That's the weird thing with EA is like there is so much of them that I don't like. The sports franchises, like what they can still manage to do in a negative way with the Apexes and Sims. I think they're just letting die, on the sidelines. So they can be very bad, but I honestly would argue they were worse. Because like Battlefield, I think it's safe to say has rebounded at least a little bit. Games like, Motives games or, Respawn single-player games, those weren't even allowed a little while ago, right? So it's like just to have those coming out, in some ways they've learned. And basically what I just don't want to happen as part of the sale is for them to shed that part because, EA is probably at least 50% bad, at least, if not more than 50% bad. And the rest of it kind of used to be bad. It used to be much worse. So they've gotten a little bit better. I don't want them to shed that good to just kind of triple down on the bad, But, with me personally, and if you guys have watched enough of these videos, you might know this. Like, I really do try to, like, give them chances. Not just EA. I'm not just like an EA. It's not an EA simp type thing. I give a lot of things chances, even when things look bad or the deck is stacked against something. I mean, I gave Veilguard chances just to name an EA, specific example. I'm willing to give them, like, depending on what happens, we'll see. But, I'm not saying, like, it's doomsday or anything like that. And even if there are pivots and changes that initially don't look good, I mean, I'm willing to see it through until release, and then after, then I make a decision, right? And then we can talk about it then. So that's my thoughts on it. You let me know your thoughts in the comments. Make sure, as always, you're subscribed to the channel, bell icon turned on, and I hope to see you all on the next one.